Good evening, cousins. You made it to day 5. And we have talked about a lot, okay? 5 days ago, we started a conversation about something providers don't really expect. The possibility that success can stop feeling like freedom. People don't really talk about that. People talk about how you're supposed to get to this moment of growth as if that's the height, and then there's nothing else to achieve after that. And I introduced you to what you need to watch for after growth so that you don't end at growth, but so that growth becomes sustainability. We talked about the possibility that success can stop feeling like freedom. This week we met Frantic. That's what we started day 1 with. Y'all remember Frantic? We talked about what it feels like to carry everything. We talked about leadership dependency. We talked about the Range Rover that I was captive inside of. We talked about the blue couch that I thought I wouldn't make it off of. We talked about growth, and most importantly, we talked about sustainability. But there is something that should come after sustainability, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. Tonight, I want to talk about freedom. Because if I'm being honest, I don't think that any of you guys, any providers, wake up dreaming about compliance, okay? Nobody wake up, oh, I'm excited about these policies. I'm excited about these audits. I'm excited about documentation. It's so exciting about these regulations. Nobody wake up like that, right? What most providers are trying to attain is freedom. Freedom to attend their child's game, freedom to take a vacation without your laptop, freedom to spend time with your family without constantly checking your phone. Freedom to sleep through the night without hearing your phone ring when it's not even ringing. Freedom to stop checking every 5 minutes to see if staff is having a crisis. Freedom to trust what happens when you are not at your agency. And that's why I say something that usually get me strange looks, okay? I'm gonna say it now. Compliance, compliance is sexy. But before you log off, let me explain, okay? Of course, policy not sexy. Audits aren't sexy. Regulation isn't sexy. Documentation not sexy. Yeah, I know that. I know that. What I'm talking about is freedom is sexy. Trust is sexy. Peace is sexy. Confidence is sexy. Knowing that you can leave your organization for 2 weeks and standards will still be followed in your absence, that's sexy, right? Knowing implementation survives your absence. Trusting that your team can carry the mission, that's sexy. Actually being able to make it to the cookout and enjoy the cookout, sexy. Being able to go on vacation and sit on the side of the pool with a margarita and not your phone, sexy. And that's really what the compliant CEO is all about. I'm not talking about rules, I'm talking about conditions. After losing my agency, I became obsessed with one question. If everything that happened to me was because of an implementation gap, then what creates implementation? Not compliance, implementation. Because the audit didn't reveal bad intentions. The audit didn't reveal that I didn't care. I cared. The audit didn't reveal a lack of commitment. The audit revealed missing conditions. That's what I call implementation gaps. The distance between what we knew and what was consistently executed. And over time, I started noticing something. The same patterns kept happening everywhere. I'm not saying the same exact citations. I'm not saying the same findings. I'm not saying the same services. I'm talking about the same drivers. The conditions influencing whether implementation succeeded or failed. I eventually started calling them the five drivers of implementation. Because if leadership dependency, implementation gaps, and organizational trust are the conditions we can observe, these five drivers help explain why those conditions exist in the first place. So let's talk about the drivers. The first driver is shared belief. And I want to explain this, okay? When I first started my agency, my first employee name was Joey. Shout out Joey if you listen. And back then, when I hired Joey, I didn't have no departments. There weren't any managers. There weren't layers of leadership. There was me and there was Joey. I remember like one afternoon, a transportation vehicle broke down. But of course, clients still needed to get picked up. Families were still waiting. Schedules were already tight, baby, because we stretched that thing as far as we could go when it was just him and I. And I needed help. So I remembered I called Joey and I said, Joey, I need you. And before I could even go into my explanation, because I was ready to tell him why. I was ready to tell him how he'll benefit from it as well. I was ready to tell him all these things, okay? But he cut me off so fast and he said, where do you need me? Not whose fault was it? Now it's not my responsibility. Not how much longer this day gonna be. He said, where do you need me? Years later, I realized the most important part of that story wasn't what Joey did. It was more so why he did it. Joey wasn't helping because he memorized the policy. He was helping because he believed in what we were building. The policy explains what to do. The belief explains why it matters. The rule explains how the standard is carried out. Shared belief explains why the standard matters. Implementation begins long before accountability. Implementation begins with belief. I promise you, people are far more likely to protect what they believe in than what they merely understand. Okay? Now let's move to the second one. The second driver is trust. Trust influences implementation in ways many agencies fail to recognize. When people feel unsafe, they focus on protecting themselves, right? But when people feel safe, they focus on protecting the mission. Think about it. Fear creates compliance. Oh, let me hurry up and do this before the boss comes or before the auditor comes. But trust creates ownership. Let me make sure I get this done. You know what? I'm gonna make sure that my documentation is done every day because I trust our system. And we're doing something bigger than just me. Many organizations unintentionally rely on punishment as their implementation strategy. But that just means people comply because they fear the consequences. But ownership is different. Ownership is what survives your absence. Ownership is what continues when nobody is watching. And ownership grows in environments where trust exists. The third driver is reinforcement. As our agency grew, I started noticing something. I had a day program, I had residential homes, I had transportation and vocational, but I'm going to uh provide you an example of the day program versus the residential homes because I think this was the easiest way for you to understand what I'm saying regarding reinforcement, okay? So the day program consistently performed differently than the residential homes. And at first I blamed the employees. I'm just gonna be honest. But today I understand something different. They were in two different conditions. My office was inside the day program. So I was there every day. I saw what was happening. I could provide the staff with coaching, support. I participated in the activities. We used to line dance in the morning at the day program. So they saw me. They saw me actively living out the mission. They saw me reinforcing expectations, reinforcing beliefs, reinforcing the culture. But if I'm being honest, at the homes, it was different. Of course, I gave the staff the policies. I went through orientation. I gave them the training, but they didn't always experience the culture that stood behind those policies. They didn't see the mission like the people who was at the day program, seeing me bring the mission to life by line dancing with the clients, helping change the pens and all the things. They didn't see that at the homes. And one day it hit me. The difference was not staff's commitment. It wasn't them. It wasn't talent. It wasn't a difference in caring. The difference was reinforcement. For years, I thought culture was something you talked about. And today, I believe culture is something you reinforce. People don't become committed because they read expectations. Trust me. You can give staff a policy book this big and tell them to read it and answer the questions, and they're going to do it. But that is not what's going to make them committed to your agency. They become committed because they repeatedly experience them, not from reading them, experiencing them. What leaders reinforce consistently is what becomes culture. What leaders assume eventually becomes risk. What you reinforce is going to become the culture. What you assume everybody should know this policy, everybody should know these rules, and you're just putting that out because of your assumption, because you wrote the rule down and you told them in orientation, that's going to eventually become risk. The fourth driver is accountability. And many agencies confuse accountability with correction, and that's not what I'm talking about. Accountability is not what happens after you make a mistake, after a staff member make a mistake. Accountability is what exists before the mistake occurs. True accountability exists when expectations are clear, When expectations are reinforced consistently and supported by systems. It's not enough for you to just tell the staff what they need to do. You need to reinforce what you're telling them to do, and they need to be supported by a system that's implemented in the agency, not for you to be the system. When accountability depends on you and your presence, implementation is going to remain fragile. But when accountability is embedded into your organization by design, expectations will survive even in your absence. The fifth driver is capacity. When I think about my own story, for a long time, I thought burnout was a personal problem. I thought it was because, oh, my life, I'm trying to balance my, people say work-life balance. And I just so burned out. I thought that was personal. But today I see it differently. Burnout is often an implementation problem. Because when leaders become overwhelmed, exhausted, overloaded, their ability to reinforce expectations begin to decline. Important conversations start getting delayed. Oh, I just talked to her tomorrow. Oh, I talked to her about a month. I do a staff training next month and I just go over it then. Or training gets rushed because you're tired and you're just trying to push through, get it done so you can check the boxes. Coaching becomes reactive because somebody messed up. So now I gotta go in here and train her. Oh, she keep messing up on this medication and all these medication errors. So let me hurry up and do this training. Problems get postponed. And eventually implementation begins to suffer. The Range Rover wasn't the problem. The blue couch was not the problem. The burnout wasn't even the problem. All those things were symptoms. And that's when I finally understood something. The outcomes are visible. The drivers underneath them are not. The findings after an audit, yeah, that's visible. Your turnover from staff, that's visible. You see those things. Burnout is visible. Instability is visible. But the drivers beneath them often go unnoticed. And that's why I created what I now call the compliance culture model. And that's everything we just discussed. So shared belief, trust, reinforcement, accountability, and capacity. And once those five drivers are in place, it allows you to then successfully complete implementation. And after you successfully complete implementation, guess what? You're going to build organizational trust. And once you build organizational trust, there goes freedom. The strongest organizations do not arrive at freedom by accident. They create the conditions that make implementation possible. And when implementation becomes consistent over and over and over again because your system is designed beautifully, organizational trust begins to grow, not by hope, not by luck, by trust. Trust that standards are being followed. Trust that accountability actually exists. Trust that expectations are being carried out. Trust that the mission survives your absence. Because freedom isn't what you've built. Freedom is your ability to trust what you've built. And that's why I created the provider risk assessment. Not to tell you whether you're compliant, okay? Not to tell you whether you're a good provider, but to help you identify which conditions may be quietly creating risk inside your organization. Because there's no way that you're going to be able to improve what you cannot see. So take the assessment, get your score, review your findings. And if you like to talk to see what those findings actually mean, after you complete the assessment, you're going to see a prompt for you to book a provider risk and strategy session. Because awareness creates visibility. Visibility creates action. Action creates implementation. Implementation creates trust. And trust is what creates freedom. Before we end tonight, I want to leave you with something more important than the assessment to me. Because, yes, the assessment can help you identify risk. So I'm not saying that that's not important, that's extremely important. But only a decision is what's going to create change. Change that you need before you have your Range Rover moment, before you have your blue couch moment. I want to be honest with you. This week was not about audits. It wasn't about findings and it wasn't really about compliance. It was about becoming. Becoming the type of leader capable of building something that survives success. Becoming the type of leader who creates trust instead of dependency. Becoming the type of leader who understands that freedom isn't found in growth. Freedom is found in trust. And trust is built through implementation. I promise you. So if you're willing, I want to invite you to stand. And I know this might sound crazy because it's on a live, but I think this is important because I think this is a moment, not for me, but a moment for you. I want to do a pledge with you. And it's not because the pledge changes anything by itself, but because every culture begins with a commitment. And every transformation begins with a decision, just like I had to decide to get off that couch. Tonight, I want to end our time together different from the other nights. I want us to do the compliant CEO pledge. Say it after me. I am a compliant CEO. I am responsible for creating the conditions, not the excuses. I build trust, not dependency. I develop people, not fear. I protect the mission, the standards, and the people we serve. Because compliance culture is not what we do, it's what we become. And every day, I choose to become a compliant CEO. Thank you. A few years ago, I sat in my Range Rover and I couldn't get out. But tonight, I leave you with a different understanding. The strongest organizations do not arrive at freedom by accident. They create the conditions that make implementation possible. Shared belief, trust, reinforcement, accountability, and capacity, which then which then opens up a space for implementation, which builds organizational trust, which allows you to have freedom. The goal was never compliance. The goal was always freedom. And compliance culture is simply how we get there. Welcome to the Compliant CEO. I'm happy to have you. I'm happy you're here. And I'm happy you're going to put into place what you need for your agency to survive success. Good night, cousin. I'll talk to you soon.